So this video is going to encompass my favorite mobility and stability exercises for both the upper body and the lower body. Now it's important to understand that mobility and stability in weightlifting are incredibly high demand. You look at the best weightlifters, their joint angles are incredibly extreme, and it takes a long time to get there. So while we're learning the techniques of the pull and all the different stages of the lift, we have to be drilling these aspects as well. So I'm going to start off by telling you guys my 3 favorite overhead mobility and stability exercises. The overhead position is generally going to have the same rules, whether it's a jerk grip, which would be narrower, or a snatch grip, which is wider. And that is typically the wrists are going to be stacked over the elbows stacked over the shoulders and the hips, and the knees and the ankles are all going to be in one straight line. And that's when we're at full extension after the completion of the lift. Now, some people are going to have a problem even doing this, and it's a mixture of both lat mobility and some of the muscles that surround the shoulder joint, as well as the strength in the upper back and the traps that would assist in glenohumeral flexion. That's just being able to raise your hands up and then actually back once you get past 90 degrees. So this would mean some people may have issues getting their hands back into an overhead position, and then others will be able to get their hands back, but their rib cage will end up flaring up. So for this exercise, we're going to lie on an incline bench with our chest supported. We will do a behind the neck press. Now what you'll feel from here is that your upper back and maybe even your thoracic spine will light up, and you'll feel these specific areas be very active. Now this is what's required in order to extend fully in the overhead position. At first you can try pressing with a wider grip, something like your snatch grip, and then you can move on to a narrower grip, which would be closer to your jerk grip. For this, I would suggest anywhere from 3 to 5 sets of 10 to 20 reps, and you can do this before and after training. So the next exercise is probably one of my favorite for beginners. It is the strap supported bar hang. I think bar hangs are probably one of the most underrated things for a beginner to do, because it simply forces all of the joints to be locked out in the overhead position, and usually you're going to end up neutral. So what I would suggest to do is get some straps, wrap them around a bar that will allow you to hang your feet off the floor, and then as you slowly allow all of your weight to go into your hands, that's when you should think about slightly pulling the scaps down and pulling your head through. This is going to mimic more of that neutral head position, which in weightlifting is going to be slightly forward in front of all of those stacked up joints. As a coach to a lot of beginners, this has been honestly one of my saving grace mobility exercises to program. It's because it's hard to force the beginners or people who are somewhat overhead inept to just get into the position, but this movement specifically will force that. It really does stretch out a lot of the lats, and it also just works on the joint stability. When you are pulling your scaps down and getting into that neutral position, it's incredibly helpful. Again, this is something you can do before training or after training. I would suggest anywhere from 3 to 5 rounds of 30 seconds all the way up to 2 minutes. Now, 2 minutes may seem a little extreme, and I really think that it is. If you're capable of hanging onto the bar for 2 minutes for multiple sets, it's likely that this isn't the most challenging thing for you, and it might not be the best thing to do before training because you might get tired and the muscles around the joints might get tired. The final movement takes the cake for sure as far as all-encompassing stability and mobility training for the shoulders, and that is the handstand hold. Now for this, it's important to understand that the wall is there for balance and not support. So as you can see here, I can take my heels and kind of bounce them on and off the wall. That's because 99% of my weight is in my hands. Another thing that you should try to work towards if you're ever going to try and get upside down on the wall is getting your fingertips to face towards the wall. In weightlifting, we have a pronated grip on the bar, not a neutral or a supinated grip. So it's important to get your fingertips towards the wall, feel the stretch in your wrists, lock out all of the joints, and really play with the amount of pressure that you have in your hands, and trying as hard as you can to not utilize the wall as support, rather use it as balance. For this, I would recommend doing 3 to 5 rounds of 30 seconds to a minute. If you're easily getting a minute done, like I had said with the prior exercise, these are probably not that big of a challenge, and then you would be going and doing something that would cause more of a stimulus, in which case I would suggest doing after training. But if you're a beginner, you can do this before and after training. So now let's move on to the lower body, and these are my 3 favorite exercises for lower body mobility, but there's nothing that I like more than just a simple deep squat for time. And I've done a video on that. You should definitely check it out. It's just a 5-minute squat, but this is a little bit more of a different take on that. Ultimately, that's going to be my favorite movement for this. So these movements are going to be somewhat all-encompassing, but they're going to focus a lot on the ankle. If you simply do the 5-minute squat and you point your toes out to an extreme amount, you don't really develop the preparedness that the ligaments in the knee and the tendons in the knee for a deep squat that are required for when you catch a snatch or a clean. So the first one is just kind of a squat series that's focused on pointing the toes forward. And it's really, really difficult for me because I have really immobile ankles. Typically, when people have immobile ankles, that doesn't entirely limit them from getting into a deep squat. If you look at any of my catches in the snatches, they're typically pretty low. So if I'm going to be clear on this, I don't mind if the toes end up pointing out. However, if you're a beginner and that is the only way that you can reach depth is by an extreme toe point, then there are other things that we need to fix, specifically the ankle mobility, but how that's going to relate to the knee and the hip. So with this first movement, the toes are going to point forward, and then all I'm going to do is try to focus on driving my knees out really far to the side, and I'm just going to sink into this position. Now, even though I'm not holding any external load, the load of my body on my joints isn't plenty. So if I sit in this position long enough, I can start playing with my depth. Some of you may experience that your toes are going to start pointing out when you get deeper into this squat. And so that's when I would add in something that would block your toes. If you have something available like the kettlebells, you can block your heels from going in as well. This is not a mimic of the actual deep squat that you're probably going to have in either the catch of the snatch or a front squat or a catch of the clean. This is simply to work on your preparedness for these ligaments and these tendons in all of these joints. So as you can see, I sink into this deep squat, and it's a very, very uncomfortable position, but it's something that really, really has helped me over the course of multiple years, just sinking into this position, and then when I'm ready, trying to maybe lift my arms or sit upright. The next movement is a deep lunge. It's going to mimic like a very deep split jerk feeling. And this is something that if you do it long enough, you might not feel anything when you start, but if you do it long enough, you can really feel the stretch here. Important to note that both my back ankle and my front ankle are pointed out. So my toes are going to be in on both my left and my right leg. As I sink into this one, I can start playing with flexion at the hips a little bit, maybe reaching my hands up overhead. And I like to do this for 2 minutes on each side. And then finally, the good old side splits. Now, I am pretty bad at this one, but I do find that it really helps me. And this is something that I would most likely do before training and after training as well. Important to note here that I'm still pointing my toes forward, even though my legs are very far out to the side. I don't try to bail myself out by pointing my toes out. This is one where I would suggest maybe doing 30 seconds at a certain width, and then 30 seconds at maybe a little bit wider, and then 30 seconds at a little bit wider than that. Again, you're always trying to push the limits on this, but never loading it, never feeling unsafe, always just trying to push yourself a little bit further. So that's it. Those are my favorite and probably best bang for your buck mobility exercises for both the overhead position and the lower body as well. If you do those every day, I promise you, your total will go up.